really stripped down. It's been really raw because I think for me, as for probably a lot of artists, art is a form of therapy, it's a form of catharsis, and also just exploration of knowing ourselves, of understanding our pain. And the kind of the miracle of art is that experience can, through all of that pain, I think that's what resonates with people, right? So like a tuning fork for our humanity. So if we let ourselves be willing to just crack ourselves open and say, look, this is who I am, so that the people who are receiving those words can let themselves be filled fully, right? I just don't feel like I have any other option in terms of how I perform my art. I'm not a real imaginative writer. There are a lot of people that just have these incredible storylines and characters and different things going on in their work. That's never been my strength. I'm not a good prompt writer. I definitely need to work on some of my discipline as a poet and as a writer. But that's just kind of what pours out of me. So I have to have faith that God wired me that way for a reason, and that, my hope and my prayer is always that my words will be for His good and for His glory.
Oh yeah, definitely. And when did you first start writing? Did you start writing as a child, or did you start writing later on in life, like as a teenager? I know you said you went to the slams when you attended college, but when did you first actually pick up a pen and paper and feel that you could write down some of what you were thinking in terms of whether that was poetry, whether that was prose, whether that was whatever the form was?
Yeah, I read stories in elementary school. I can remember when I was in second, third grade, just kind of thinking of stories and writing stories. I also told stories. I was a big storyteller, and we had a lot of, kind of interesting situations growing up. And one of my favorite things to do when my sister was just stressed out is kind of pull her aside, and I would just tell stories for literally hours, just trying to make her laugh, right? So I don't know. It's always just been part of who I am, and it's taken different forms. I wrote a screenplay when I was in fourth grade. It's the only one I've ever written, but so it's come out in a lot of different ways, but it's just always been there.
Well, see, I didn't even know that. So what was the nature of the screenplay? And what was a 9, 10-year-old writing that was going to be a screenplay? Was it a horror film? Was it a romance? What was the nature of the screenplay?
See, this is why I should not have said that. So it was this really weird program that was like the Metropolitan Opera House was sponsoring a fourth grade class to do an opera, to write an opera. So it was actually an opera. And as I can remember, it was about this renegade kid who eventually was brought into the fold, and I don't know. I remember there was a song called "Chris is the Pits." That's all I can tell you. There was a full song score. It was. You're taking me back, Mark.
So this is somebody. What was the title of that song again?
It was "Chris is the Pits."
So apparently there was some young boy named Chris that you did not like.
Apparently.
So somehow he managed to get into a play some kind of way or another. So you actually say, I don't even think I realized this. So did you actually grow up in New York City, or what brought you to North Carolina?
Yeah, so I grew up on the Jersey Shore with all of its stereotypes being absolutely right on, but I was 3 minutes from the ocean my entire childhood and adolescence. I moved to New York City for school. I went to NYU, and I was there for about 5 years, worked. I moved down here in 2001 for grad school at Duke, actually, and never really planned on being here, but or staying here, but a number of different, personal circumstances, and really genuinely loving the area. 17 years later, and I'm still here.
Still in North Carolina, and still probably considered just as much of a North Carolinian as you are a New Yorker. Now, how can you get back up to New York or the New Jersey area And you said that those stereotypes are true. Now, whenever I think of Jersey Shore, I think of that old TV show, which is slipping me right now, The Sopranos. And so you said that a lot of that was very much was kind of the attitude of what Jersey was about.
So my dad was Sicilian, and he was. There were, extended family that were in the business, and that it was just kind of part of growing up in that area. It was very common. He abhorred everything mob related, and was very vehement in his feelings and open in his feelings about that. But there were large Italian Catholic communities where I grew up, large Jewish communities. Very different culture certainly than North Carolina.
So this is totally a different kind of community. Now, I wanted to, there are a couple of points that I really wanted to hear from you, and I hope you have the book with you. But one of them is that first one, because I think that it really captures the epitome of you. So could you tell us a little bit about what was going on in your mind when you wrote Fight Song for the Fireflies?
Sure. So I'm just going to go through the bullet points and run down this kind of period in my life, because it's probably easier to do it that way. So within the span of a year, I had met a poet, fell in love, got married, got pregnant, not necessarily in that order, and by the time I was about, I'd say 5-6 months pregnant, it was very clear that things were really off, and it had become a very abusive relationship. So I left after a physical incident when I was 8 months pregnant, and I kind of thought that would be the hard part of that whole season of my life, and it turns out was just not even close. After my son was born, or really right around that time, almost immediately I started displaying strange symptoms that I didn't recognize as such at the time. For me, it was just reality. But essentially, I was later diagnosed with bipolar depression 1, postpartum onset. And for the first 5 months of my son's life, I was in and out of psychiatric institutions throughout North Carolina. And that was hell. That was absolutely hell on earth, and I pray I never have to go through that experience again. But it's given me such a greater understanding of this whole area around mental health and mental illness, and what is happening in this country that no one is talking about. And so this particular poem, I wrote it in the first facility that I was in. I talk about this in the poem, but I literally wrote it in crayon on the back of scraps of paper because we couldn't have pens or pencils. And it's just kind of, people use the term survivor to talk about a lot of different things, and I've survived different things in my life in terms of, rape and domestic violence and these different things that people use the term survivor for. My survival in those instances was really dumb luck. Mental illness is the only thing that I really had to bite and scrape and crawl my way through. And so this poem, I wanted to, as it's titled, Fight Song for the Fireflies, those who, burn bright but maybe burn out quickly, for everyone to know it's okay, that your experience is seen, that you're human, because that is not always how you feel in these places, and that you can do this. You can put one foot in front of the next and do this. So that's kind of how this came about. So, Fight Song for the Fireflies. I was struck by wrenching revelation recently. Seems I feel most at home in homeless shelters and psych wards, or behind mics in rooms full of strangers, alongside those brave enough to let it all break. Let shattered pieces and the shame that slice like razor blades baptize us anew, time and as many times as it takes again. We are the devoutly alive, the stubbornly still here, the feverishly faithful God and beauty seekers. We wield mustard seed faith to battle our own brains and wake up each morning with a prayer of gratitude to do it all over again. Some lobby to call us the neurodiverse, but we don't need any satin ribbon to tell us the color of our muddy, dry blood souls or the cost we paid to dry that blood. We are not a sanitized awareness campaign. We are the neuro-annihilated, the nearly obliterated, the steadfastly still standing despite. We are a collection of purloined poems, stashing scribbled stanzas in Gideon-given Bible before the Haldol or Ativan pluck the words from our tongues. We pilfer in back pocket pens like cherished grenade pins after standing at nurse's station, soul and throat, begging, "Can I get a pen?" And when we're offered a golf pencil, for our own safety, they say, correcting, "No, I mean a real damn pen," only to be refused, and left wondering who in the hell would believe that any writing tool could inflict no pain, scoffing as if such a thing were possible. But I digress. We are the ones who don't idolize the beats, because we've been the beats, chapped lip, unromantic. We've walked their non-skid, slippered footsteps down unadorned, bleached hallways, offer bloodstreams as sacred sacrifice to calibrated chemicals, all in service of pilgrimage toward holy clarion clarity. And yes, Mr. Ginsburg, there are still rubber rooms in Rocky Mount NC for us way station wayfarers. The night stalkers who recite Howl like the Our Father and the Our Father like one more time, praying to God and Ginsburg's ghost to forgive whatever sins have shipwrecked us here. We are the excruciatingly exalted, the invisibly invincible, the ones who have been doing this for more decades than we've been not doing this. We are the graffiti artists who tag exit routes through hellscapes on the back of our eyelids so sweet sleep will feel safe enough to visit us again. We are the believers. Above all, we will believe. To my fellow heart-shredded warriors, I'm humbled to be a voice among you, and a voice for those of you who lost your words.
Wow. Yep, another one of your very powerful points. Now, I've always wondered this, and I was just wondering how you cope with this, because I know that throughout history, there have been a lot of artists that do wind up going through going through the mental wards or going through things of that nature. I'm thinking about like Mingus, who was noted as a great jazz artist, but who definitely went through various psych wards up in New York and everything. But it seems to me, as one outside who has not gone through those institutions, probably have come close a couple of times but haven't gone through them as of yet, that the borderline between what we consider sanity and true creativity is a very thin line.
Yeah, I think there is, kind of that madness genius thing that we talk about, right? And I think the brain is incredibly complex. There's been some recent research that has shown that people with a positive correlation between individuals with top 0.1% verbal abilities and actual connection to bipolar disorder. I think there's definitely something there. My brain is not normal. It never has been. I've always dealt with depression from the time I was an adolescent as well. So I absolutely think that there's a connection between those who have the ability to bring something completely novel and innovative into the world, and having, unfortunately, a flip side of that can be really damaging and suffering in terms of mental illness. There's this, I kind of referenced it, this neurodiversity movement that's springing up that is encouraging people to really kind of embrace all aspects of, these kind of unique brains and brain chemistries. I think the only thing that gives me a little bit of pause in those conversations, and, it's kind of, I think it can minimize the suffering that people go through, and I think it can also kind of take some of the responsibility